Welcome to Thresholds of Consciousness, conversations on dreams, non-ordinary reality, and transformation. In this series, I speak with clinicians, researchers, authors, teachers, and artists about the personal experiences that have shaped their work. Together, we explore what they've learned about the nature of consciousness and the healing process. My guest today is Stephan A. Schwartz, author, researcher, and pioneer of modern remote viewing research. For more than 4 decades, he has studied consciousness, non-local awareness, meditation, healing, and the relationship between mind and reality. His work has spanned academia, government consulting, archaeology, and futures research, and he is the author of numerous books, including The Secret Vaults of Time, Opening to the Infinite, and The 8 Laws of Change. Today, we'll explore his decades-long investigation into consciousness and what it reveals about the processes of social change. Thank you so much for coming, Stephan.
My pleasure.
You have such a vast repertoire of work over the years, and I'm really excited just to get to talk to you about some of the different things you've studied. Much of your work has been around remote viewing.
I created it, 1968.
So, for any listener that's not familiar with what that is, can you just explain what is remote viewing?
Remote viewing is accessing non-local consciousness, that part of consciousness that is not physiologically based, and acquiring information. People have been doing it for thousands of years. At least the oldest recorded remote viewing we know is in the 46th chapter of Herodotus's Histories of the World. That dates to the 5th century BCE. So people have been doing it for thousands of years. The oracles, the Greek oracles, the Mayan oracles, the Chinese oracles, we're all doing a form of what today we would call remote viewing. I designed, because I wanted a form of remote viewing that could be objectively verified and that was irrefutable. That's the only difference that I made. As I say, people have been doing, I would call it accessing non-local information for thousands of years. It is done by attaining and sustaining intention-focused awareness so that your sensory impressions and the normal thoughts that are bubbling through your mind slide into the background, quiet, and you are able, through intention-focused awareness, to focus on specific questions and provide answers.
And so when you say intention-focused awareness, does that mean there's an object of your attention that you're directing your attention towards the question specifically, and then something results from that?
Yeah, you are trying to obtain information of some kind of specific, whatever it is. It could be solving a murder, it could be predicting a financial outcome, it could be finding an archaeological site. The key to it is you have to recognize that both the researcher and the viewer are participants in this. You create what I call a biocircuit of intentionality between the person who's asking the question and the person who's answering it. And they ask you a question, and if you are doing it properly, I prefer to do only triple blind experiments. That is, at the time that I'm asking the question, there is no living human who knows the answer. So the only way you can get the answer is by accessing non-local consciousness. And it's not has nothing to do with energy. It has to do with the acquisition of information. This is an information phenomena.
What's important about that distinction that it has nothing to do with energy, it's more about information?
For the first 100 years or so of parapsychology, people thought it was energy. There was basically that before there was remote viewing, people thought that what was happening was that there was a sender and a receiver and some kind of signal. And most people thought it was electromagnetic in nature. In
Got it.
1977, I did an experiment using a submarine, which proved that it had nothing to do with energy. It was not electromagnetic in nature. And in the archaeological work, I proved that you could acquire information down to 16ths of an inch that no human had known for thousands of years. So it's not a question of going somewhere, and it's not a question of getting a signal, although people still talk about it like this. It's a question of opening to the non local aspect of consciousness, which opens you up to the informational architecture, which is the reality of, or is the actuality of how reality is constructed. Max Planck said in 1931, he was interviewed by the Observer newspaper, and Planck, who was the father of quantum mechanics, was not a guy that gave a lot of interviews. And they asked him, you and Einstein are the two most famous scientists in the world. You're the father of quantum mechanics. What have you learned? And I think they thought he was going to talk about fields or molecules or I don't know, something like that. And instead, what he said was, what I have learned is that consciousness is causal and fundamental. Space time arises from consciousness, not consciousness from space time. To understand reality, you must understand that consciousness is causal. And when they went and asked Einstein a similar question, he said, you have to understand that reality is an optical delusion. So, what both of these men, and there are others, Planck, Pauli, Schrodinger, Heisenberg, all of them started out as materialists, but they ended up recognizing that consciousness was the causal and fundamental aspect.
And when we make that shift from materialism to consciousness being primary and causal, how does that change our sense of, or how might that change our sense of what we are, who we are in the context of the world, the environment, the universe?
It changes it very fundamentally because the first thing that you get out of this is the continuity of consciousness. That is, your eternal self, what religions call the soul or the spirit, episodically manifests a personality which it chooses to incarnate at a particular location to a particular set of parents, a particular socioeconomic background, a particular race, a particular gender. All of that's chosen and it manifests another personality. And once you get that and you recognize that there is continuity of consciousness, then you think about things quite differently. And then you also recognize that all consciousness is interconnected and interdependent. If consciousness is causal and fundamental, then all consciousness is interdependent and interconnected. And in fact, the latest research shows that all forms of life have some measure of consciousness. I just read a paper that flowers hear the bees, hear them. And when
Wow.
they hear them, they make their nectar sweeter so that they will attract the bees. Fungus has a consciousness. Trees have consciousness. Octopuses have consciousness. Gorillas have consciousness, whatever. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. And what that also leaves you with is that it is in your interest and the interest of everyone that you foster well-being. That should be what culture is about. Unfortunately, that isn't what happens. Our culture is about greed and power. What we should be doing, and what those countries which are most successful are doing, is fostering well being. You foster well being, people are happier, healthier, they live longer, they're more productive, whatever you like.
This kind of leads us into your work on the 8 laws of change. And I wonder, how did you come up with those laws? Like, what was your method or process?
I studied history. I am interested in politics, partisanship, philosophy, metaphysics, any of that. I care about only one thing: objectively verifiable information. My interest in politics is anthropological. It's like studying tribes or cults. And the same thing, if you look at religion and why religion exists, what you find is it's all about consciousness. All religions are about accessing non local consciousness. They develop different cultures, different words, different practices. But if you get down to the core, you find that they all do the same thing. So, what I care about is objectively verifiable, observable, measurable aspects of consciousness. And that's what my research is all about, both my experimental work and my social transformation work. And that's where the 8 laws came from. I studied thousands of years of history, and I looked at where things foster well being. And it turns out there are those 8 laws.
In your work on the 8 laws, you talk about this concept of being or beingness as being a catalyst for change, for social change. Can you just say more about what that term means to you in this context?
Beingness,
Yes.
beingness is not just what you say, it's not just what you do, it's what you think. It is your attitudes. It is the totality of your character. So you can talk one thing, but think another. All kinds of scam artists do that. You can claim that you have certain goals, but you actually have others. So beingness is, and I got the idea, by the way, from Mahatma Gandhi, who said exactly what I just said. He said, it's not what you say, it's not what you think, it's not what you do, it's all of that, and all of it must foster well being. So it's who you are really, not who you claim to be or who you mask yourself as being. You have to be genuinely fostering well being. Now, you can have your beingness, if you don't do that, is negative. So it's a choice. you get to make.
That's another piece of their work is you talk about how small choices can lead to big changes. And I wonder if you could just speak to that
Yes,
more.
think about it. I'll give you some examples. Culture is created by consensual choices. Think about it. It's why the Japanese cook eggplants differently than the Italians. Why? Nobody passed a law and said you have to do it. What happens is a culture evolves because of collective intention and consciousness. People develop attitudes and practices. That's what creates culture, right? So, how do you do that? You do that by the little choices that you make every day. Every day you go out and make dozens of little tiny choices. The cat food you buy, the toilet paper you buy, the where you go to fill up your gas tank, the things that you support, the people you hang out with, all of those little choices that you make, which you don't think about, you just do them. But you need to become aware of what you're doing. And you want all of the choices of the options that are available to you, even though all of the options, none of them may be tremendously fostering of well-being, but there is always one option that is better than the others. Always. So you always choose that option of the ones that are available to you that is the most compassionate, fostering of well-being, and life affirming. And you do that, and you tell 10 friends that you're doing it as a discipline. It requires you to do some work. You have to find out about the companies. Do the companies whose products you buy support well-being, or are they only in it for greed? So you have to do a little research. But with Google, it's easy to do. So that's the stuff that you buy, the things. You only support group activities which foster well-being. This isn't complicated. You are capable of knowing the answer to the question. And every day, as you make these little, I call them quotidian choices, I deliberately use that word because it's a word almost nobody knows. So therefore, it stands out in your mind. It means mundane, ordinary, uncomplicated. Anyway, all these little choices you make, you do it as a discipline. You tell 10 people that you are doing it as a discipline and invite them to join you in doing it and to ask 10 of their friends. And we know from research that when 10% of any cohort change in consciousness about something, that the whole cohort has to change or does change as a result of that. Now, I'll give you some examples. When you were a boy and you went to somebody's house, you're old enough, you probably remember that there was an ashtray on the coffee table in the living room and maybe a pack of cigarettes and one of those lighters. You don't see that anymore. Why not? Nobody passed a law that said you can't do it. What happened was enough information came out that people chose not to do it, and the culture changed. I'll give you another example. When is the last time you heard anyone use the word Negro? You don't hear it anymore. Why not? Nobody said you can't say it. But what happened was black people decided They didn't want that word, so they stopped using it. And white people who knew black people or who listened to black people or who saw black people on media or somewhere noticed that they didn't use it. You never hear it used anymore. Culture changes when about 10% alter in consciousness. We know this from research that Rensselaer Polytech Institute did and published about this. So whether it's a neighborhood, a school, a church, a city, a nation, whatever, when 10% of the cohort changes in consciousness, the whole cohort is affected by that. And what's going on in the United States now is we have become two cultures in a single country. We're basically two countries, the red states and the blue states. And if you look at the social outcome data, forget about the politics, all that philosophical arguing. Just look at the outcome. Red states, people live shorter lives, they're less happy, they're less literate, they have higher maternal mortality, they have higher child mortality. They have less pleasant lives. Why? And the answer is because of choices made collectively by individuals. That's what voting is about. Voting is a way of, at a particular moment in time, asking a population, what's your consciousness? Red states do less well than blue states. And it's quite significant, by the way. Americans live much shorter lives, for instance, than Nordic countries, Japan. And the difference between the states is very notable. Washington State, where I live, average age about 81. Louisiana, about 74. That's a huge difference. Why does that difference occur? Because of choices, because of consciousness, collectively expressed.
You wrote this book about 10 years ago now, was when it was published originally, The 8 Laws of Change. As I was reading it, I just couldn't help but just think how everything that you're saying is so relevant, even more relevant, it seems, than when you wrote it in these times. And sometimes because the divide is so great, it's hard to even know how to bridge to have any conversations that facilitate new perspectives. And I wonder if you could speak to that at all, just that difficulty of just how siloed in this country people are and how difficult it is to, like the entrenched, the way that folks get entrenched and how that kind of keeps things from moving forward.
Part of the problem, Scott, is that we don't talk about it correctly. I'm writing a new book, by the way, which is specifically about this. I just sent it off to my agent, so we'll see if it gets published and when. But you run into somebody who is in the other culture, let's put it that way. And instead of arguing about politics, what you should say is, and what we should be talking about, how could we get childcare to be better in our community? Do you agree that we should take care of children when they're little? No matter which side of that you're on, you're probably going to say yes. So, how can we make that better? What can we do in our community that could make this better? What could we do? We don't score very well in education, literacy. 54% of Americans can't read past the 6th grade. 43% can't read past the fifth grade. That means that about half of the country cannot read the New York Times and properly comprehend it. So there you are. You're sitting across the table from someone who has utterly different political views than you. And you say, gosh, our kids aren't reading very well. What can we do about that? How can we help that? Or, gosh, we're very polluted. What do you think we could do to stop all the pollution? Or, gee, we have a terrible maternal mortality, women dying during pregnancies. What do you think we ought to do about that? So you talk about well-being. How do we find well-being? How do we create well-being in our community? And you find that you can talk to people about that, and you don't talk about it politically. You talk about it in terms of well-being.
There's a way to bridge to the common ground through that intentionality, as you said, through
Yeah,
having the focus be on how do we make decisions collectively in our communities that are life enhancing to the members of our communities. In that sense, it's not about politics, it's about actually what is pragmatic in terms of well-being.
yes, yes, exactly.
So you're someone that has done so much research, and you said something just about the reading level. I think there's a culture of anti-intellectualism in the United States, and I wonder if you have more to say about that. If we have all this, if we have data, if we have all these studies, it seems that in this particular day and age, anyone can just say, oh, okay, that doesn't matter or that's not real. They could come up with any kind of reason to not believe it. And how are we supposed to address that if we do believe some of the studies that are coming out, if we do see the data supports a certain way of approaching wellness and community and well-being?
You ask a question. Start with a question. Gosh, are you happy with the fact that they just closed the only hospital that we have within 100 miles? Does that seem like a good idea to you? That's what's happening. Medical deserts are arising, particularly in the red states, but all over the country in rural areas, particularly. So you have a heart attack and you have to go an hour and a half to get to a hospital, you probably aren't going to make it. So do you think it's a good idea that our hospital just closed and that we'll have to drive 100 miles to get to a hospital? What do you think the answer is going to be? No, I don't care. I think that's a great idea.
Of course not.
Of course not. So, what can we do that fixes that so that we have medical care that is reasonably available, that is available to us? How can we do that? What can we do? Maybe what we could do is start a community movement that all of us got into, and we put together a nonprofit foundation, and we each contributed a little bit of money, and maybe we could apply for some state money or federal money, or maybe there's some rich people who live in the neighborhood who also would be interested in that. The circumstances are different. But what you do is you sit down together, and even though you don't like each other or you don't think politically the same or whatever, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson didn't like each other very well. What do? So you say, how can we do this? Do we agree that it's not a good thing that we don't have a hospital within 100 miles of us? What can we do to fix that? or farmers. We can't get whatever because it's not available anymore. How are we going to deal with that? You find common ground in fostering well-being because whatever your political views are, you want your kids to be healthy. You want your wife to be safe and healthy. You want yourself to be safe and healthy. So you just get to the very basic things and you say, what can we do to foster well-being? Because we both experience that we don't have well-being. The hospital's closed. The school's closed. Your wife can't get the medical attention she needs, whatever. You find the places where everyone agrees that you want to foster well-being. And that's where you start.
I think it's such a powerful message because there are so many people who feel that sense of powerlessness about the how things are going right now. And what you're saying is you find a way to find what is workable, what action can be taken. And I think you're also pointing to, you didn't quite say this, but just that we are more powerful when we're together, when we're in community,
Yes,
when we're not isolated.
yes,
And sometimes it just seems that there's such a movement towards isolation. I think it was 2023, the Surgeon General released a pamphlet on what he called the epidemic of loneliness. And it just seems
mhm,
that in the past, just how things have gone. I think even prior to the pandemic, there was that direction, but more and more that there are folks that are having difficulty really experiencing that sense of togetherness.
yes, yes, that's exactly correct. It's particularly true with young people who
Yeah.
spend anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day staring at a screen. They don't go out and play. They're lonely and they're threatened often, particularly girls. There's a huge problem about young boys taking pictures of girls and creating fake porn and then distributing it on social media, or boys who develop AI girlfriends, I guess is the way to describe it.
Yeah.
That is, it's not even a real person. So, how do you deal with that? You go into the school meeting or the community meeting and you say, gosh, are you having this problem? Gee, so am I. Tell you what, suppose we organized so that our kids went out and we all took them hiking in the woods, or we all took them we live on the water on the river and we got a bunch of boats and we took them out on a boat trip. That sort of thing. Oh, you think that might be helpful? Where they got to play with other kids instead of staring at their screen, they went hiking together. I can tell you that when I was 11 years old, I was introduced to hiking in the woods, and spending time in forests became one of my major interests. And as one of the major happy memories of my life is time spent in wilderness because kids interact with it. They interact with each other, interacting with it. So you as a community get together and let's put the politics aside. You've got an 8 year old, I've got an 8 year old. Let's get them together. They could do something together, not a competitive game, but something like walking in the woods where they could just have an experience that doesn't require any particular attitude or because the experience will create an attitude, will make them aware that the forests matter and that they like spending time there. They get to see things that they wouldn't see otherwise, that you don't, that they're not going to see on their staring at their smartphones. That's what you're doing. You're fostering well-being because you make that the main social priority. Same thing. So when you live in a community, you become part of a community, and in the process of becoming part of the community, you get less lonely. And in finding things, whatever your political views, but things which all of you agree will foster well being, and you do them together, lo and behold, your attitude about people changes. Why are other countries happier than we are? We rank, if you look at the social outcome data, we rank terribly in terms of happiness. So, how do we deal with that? We get together and do communal things together. We have public celebrations, parties. Let's have a 4th of July and bring all our kids and we'll have a meal. We'll have some fireworks. Kids will love it. Your kid will love it. My kid will love it. Let's do that. Let's get our church to put it together, our school to put it together, whatever. That's the point. When you find that you recognize that all consciousness is interconnected and interdependent, and that fostering well-being is the most successful course of action, and you start doing it, it changes your beingness, it changes your sense of connection. You become a different person. You have different interests. You care about other things. That's what's going on. What's happening is that our kids don't go out and play. They sit and stare at smartphones. And if the other kids attack them, then they, as they often do, when you get to be a certain early teenagers, you break into little groups. And if you're not part of the group, then you get attacked. Plus, you have the weaponization of misinformation because most people get most of their information off of social media. And social media is being manipulated by a few billionaires. So we're becoming a neo-medieval society in which we have a tiny percentage who have most of the wealth. We have a small middle class, and then we have a very large peasantry. People who are just getting by. If you're a millionaire, you don't care if gas is $6 a gallon, which is what it is where I live. Okay, it's $6 a gallon. So what? But if you're making $50,000 a year, $6 a gallon costs $120 to fill up your 20-gallon gas tank in your car, and you have to do that a couple times a week. You got a real problem. So that neo-medievalism is part of this splitting the country up. That's the thing that's really happening, is that we're splitting the country up and we are becoming a neo-medieval society, just like 14th century England. You got a few people who are really rich. You have a small middle class, doctors and lawyers, although the lawyers are getting richer and the doctors are getting richer as well. But you have a small middle class, and then you have the great majority of people who are just getting by. And you see it in the newspapers, in the reports on television all the time.
Yeah, medievalism is, I think, an accurate way to talk about it. I was just watching a documentary on the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome, and it was alarming to see and hear so many of the parallels to what is happening now in terms of the wealth disparity that you're describing, the inequality. And yeah, of course, it makes sense to someone who's just getting by. $6 a gallon is it's prohibitive. It's and now people are choosing between food or transportation or gas. And folks that have more resources, yeah, it's not going to impact them the same, not at all. And so
Yeah.
there's a real that I think that can lend itself to a kind of a hopelessness for people who are a part of the just getting by class. And I wonder if you have, if there's some message that you have to folks who are just getting by around what your work, how your work might support them, or anything that you've studied.
You join together. Okay, we'll carpool and we'll split the cost of the gas. We'll each drive one day and all of us together, whatever. We all work within a few blocks of each other, whatever it is. You start gardening. My wife, for instance, grows all our food except for proteins, oils, citrus, because it won't grow here. And she donates food to lots of other people. Like that, you don't think it's a big deal, but I'm going to give you a tomato plant that I've started. Right? So here's 3 tomato plants. That's going to give you the tomatoes that you're going to eat all summer long. My wife makes organic, everything we eat is organic. And that's another thing. You become aware of the poisons that are in your life, the things that you spray that smell good, or the things that you wash with, whatever. One of the big problems is Americans live in a culture in which there are unrecognized poisons which impact your health. It's part of the reason we have shorter lives. So you go through your house and you get rid of everything that isn't an organic product. Whatever, the soaps, the sprays, the laundry things, the car cleaners, I don't know, whatever. You start gardening. You give a few plants away to other people who might be helped by them. Again, you think in terms of I am a part of a community and I get my community. You get all the people in your neighborhood together and you say, let's start a community garden and we'll grow the vegetables that we need. So when cucumbers cost $4 a piece, as they do in the market here, that we can grow those cucumbers. We can get blueberries and make jams, which we can make together, and we'll do it together. And that's what people used to do. That's why they were happier, even though their conditions were, by our standards, very reduced. But they worked together, they got together, they shared together, they sought to produce well being for all of them. That helps. The problem is when you think you're alone and you don't have any connections, you don't know your neighbors, you don't have anything to do with anybody, you're just kind of stuck by yourself looking at your smartphone, then that's pretty grim. So you need to reach out and find a way. If there's a community organization that already exists, you join it or you start one. Think about it for a minute. How did Mahatma Gandhi, a man who had no particular money, had no official position, didn't command an army, how did he get the British, who for 350 years had controlled India and it was their most cherished colonial possession, how did he get them to give India independence without a war? The answer is, as he said, is beingness. He got people together nonviolently to resist the oppression that they were experiencing, and the British gave them independence. How did Nelson Mandela end apartheid in South Africa? He was in jail most of it. Same thing. Nonviolent, collective intention, supporting well-being, fostering well-being, and opposing oppression. How did Martin Luther King, a black clergyman in a little Baptist church, how did he get the United States government to sign the civil, and Lyndon Johnson, a Southern Democrat, to sign the Civil Rights Act in 64, 1964, and the Voting Rights Act in 65? He didn't have any money. He didn't have an army. He didn't have any official position other than he was the pastor at this little Baptist church. And yet I was there when he gave the I Have a Dream speech. I watched him. I walked down Constitution Avenue to the Lincoln Memorial with tens of thousands of other people. And he gave the I Have a Dream speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial. How did that happen? And the answer is it was the nature of his beingness. You don't have to be a perfect person. Nelson Mandela wasn't a perfect person. Gandhi wasn't a perfect person. Martin Luther King wasn't a perfect person. George Washington wasn't a perfect person. But they all came to believe that fostering well being, nonviolently, collectively, was the thing to do. And that's what they did.
Do you recall what it felt like inside of you being there as Martin Luther King Jr. was giving that speech? What was happening
Oh, yes,
internally for you
very
in that
much.
moment?
I, I was walking down Constitution Avenue with a black friend that I had met. I was working for National Geographic, and I had met this other journalist, a black guy. We were walking down Constitution Avenue past the buildings aren't there anymore. What used to be the old Navy Center. And as we were doing that, I looked over to the right, and there were two partners from the most conservative law firm in the city of Washington. And I knew this because I had a very good friend who was a partner at one of the more progressive law firms in the city, Steptoe and Johnson. And this guy was from, these two guys were from Covington and Burling, which at the time was a Republican law firm, as it were. And I looked over and saw these two guys, and they were happy and they were talking, and they were some other people they were talking with. And I turned to my friend and said, I think we've done it. I think civil rights is going to work because civil rights had been scary, actually. I got arrested a number of times at demonstrations. They put you in jail and could charge you $25 to, which was not an insignificant sum of money to get out, just basically to get control. And I looked over and I saw these two guys, these two partners, middle-aged men. I was, I don't know, 23, 24, something like that. And I thought, it's going to work. And it did. And we got down to the memorial along the reflecting pond that's in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And the crowds were just enormous. And they were lining both sides of the reflecting pond and up toward the Lincoln Memorial. And I walked up forward and I had met Martin Luther King once, and I got actually quite close. And I saw him, and you could see he was not just moved, but he had a sense that it was going to work. And he began to speak. And he gave the I Have a Dream speech. And the reaction of the people, the thousands of people, was just incredibly positive. And then after it was over, we began to dispel, go back. And as I say, my thinking was, we're going to get gender and racial equality. Now, let me say this also. As I said earlier when we began talking, this business of the continuity of consciousness. You remember that the eternal self, as I say, what religion calls the soul, episodically chooses to incarnate and manifests a personality and of a certain gender and race and location and socioeconomic background, all of those things. So when you think about that and you look at the actual research that has been done, studying thousands of cases of reincarnation, Ian Stevenson, Jim Tucker, Erlander Helson, thousands of cases. What in the data, in the research data, is that what comes across is information. So if you think about it that way, then you realize that you might incarnate as a woman, or you might incarnate as a man, or you might incarnate as a Black person, or an Asian person, or a Native American person, whatever. And so gender differences are silly. Racial differences are silly because the person that you don't like, who's Black or who's a woman or whatever, maybe the last time you were the Black person and they were the white person and they were mean to you, and so that's why you don't like them. Once you get the continuity of consciousness idea, you realize that gender, race, all of that stuff, that's all informational differences. And that fostering well-being for everyone is the best course of action for you, not just for them, but for you too.
Yeah, it really does change the scope if we understand ourselves as part of a line of rebirths or reincarnations. It really does change the relationship or the lens to how we appear now, what our appearance is now. And of course, I hear what you're saying is in doing so, it helps us to cultivate empathy and compassion for everyone, to understand that their experience isn't so separate from ours, that we're not in isolation, but that we use this term embedded. We're all embedded in the same process together. It's not
Yeah.
me and you or me versus you. It's much more of a us.
Yes.
Stefan, I see that we're just a little over an
Yeah.
hour now. Would you like to share about the upcoming course that you have?
Well, I have two courses, and you go to my website, stephanashwartz.com, or you go to glidewing.org and you can see them, or I gather in a short while that you go to something called School, Skool. But anyway, stephanashwartz.com, glidewing.org. I have a course on non-local consciousness, remote viewing, healing, creativity, meditation, telling people the best science on all of those things. It's all based on science. Again, it's not about my philosophy or my prejudices or whatever. It's based on scientific research. So, remote viewing, creativity, meditation, therapeutic intention, healing. That's one course. The other course is about becoming an agent of change for the better. It's the 8 laws. And that's about to start. If you go do a Google to Glidewing, you'll see it. So I have these two courses, which are based entirely on science, and they are designed to do and help people to understand and how to work with the very things you and I have been talking about for the last hour.
I have
The
here
fi-
that the opening to the infinite, that's the remote viewing course, right? That
yeah,
starts on July 25th. It's July 25th to
yeah,
August 16th. Empower yourself. Change starts within. Here's how. That's starting June 27th to July 12th.
yeah.
Wonderful.
And they're interactive courses. People ask questions and I answer them. So they're interactive and they give you specific exercises. You do things. So it's completely participatory and it will give you all the information that you and I have been talking about.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, all I would say is I've described it. You can do it. I encourage you to do it. You can change the world.
Thank you for listening to Thresholds of Consciousness with Dr. Scott Menasco. We are a listener-supported program. Any contributions you make support the development and production of this podcast. Please see the link in the description below.